Morning, everyone. So, the chances of that spring general election just rose remarkably. Um, yes, a bit of a hole, this one. So, for those who don't know, I'll go through very, very quickly exactly what's happened. So, Suella Braverman's on manoeuvres. In fact, if people haven't actually heard her on Nick Robinson this morning, I mean, take to Twitter, there's clips of it around there. She was properly stitched up. This is the thing I can't get, but I know it happens because we see it on the amongst the hard left as well as the hard right. You know, you'd think you would want an accomplished political operator to be your leader. Suella Braverman is not that. It's not just that, you know, we don't. I mean, you can oppose Suella Braverman just because she's abhorrent, but she's also incompetent. She's useless. She can't even get through a radio interview. She's far too desperate. She doesn't understand politics. She's like the last few leaders. They don't really get politics. But what's happened is yesterday, Rishi Sunak, or the government, because it was James Cleverly technically, but the government presented its new Rwanda bill. And just to go through some of the farce, for those who missed it last night. So there's a part of the Human Rights Act, Section 19, I'll read it out to you. Statements of compatibility. A Minister of the Crown in charge of a bill in either House of Parliament must, before second reading of the bill, make a statement to the effect that, in his view, the provisions of the bill are compatible with the Convention rights. That is the European Convention on Human Rights. Or make a statement to the effect that although he is unable to make a statement of compatibility, the government nevertheless wishes the House to proceed with the bill. The statement must be in writing and be published in such manner as the minister making it considers appropriate. So then you go to the beginning of the bill. It's called the Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill, published yesterday. On the front cover, European Convention on Human Rights. Secretary James Cleverly has made the following statement under Section 19(1)(b) of the Human Rights Act 1998. I am unable to make a statement that, in my view, the provisions of the Safety of Rwanda Bill are compatible with the Convention rights, but the government nevertheless wishes the House to proceed with the bill. So the government are basically saying, yeah, we don't think this obeys international law. Now, I want to take you back 3 years. For those who are worried about this bill, I want you to say it through. This bill is of hazard to the Conservatives, not the rest of us. 3 years ago, actually very close to 3 years ago, it was I think September, there was the Internal Markets Bill. I don't know if you remember that. I'll tell you what you will remember. It was intended to disapply bits of the Northern Ireland Protocol, right? So we'd signed this treaty. In the same year, 2020, the same year we signed this international treaty, Boris Johnson, the person who signed it and won a general election on the back of, wanted to disapply it, right? He wanted to. So it passed through the Commons because he had a large majority. And then the House of Lords said, right, we're going to block this bill. And the government went, why? And they said, you've just said it breaks international law. We cannot pass a bill that breaks the law. Oh, go on. No. So they didn't. Well, the same thing's going to happen. The same thing is going to happen, isn't it? Because on the front of this bill, it says, yeah, we can't guarantee that this obeys international law. So it's not going to get through the Lords. The question is whether it gets through the Commons. Suella Braverman's on manoeuvres, as I say. Robert Jenrick, the immigration minister, who was a close ally of Sunak's, has resigned. There's going to be a vote on this next week. Now, someone's just said there, in fact, Michael's just said, I don't think it will pass the Commons. Now, here's where it'll get interesting. I'll just do this super chat first, and then I'll just add some context to that. So John Hart, £5 super chat, thank you very much, says, if the Tory right challenges Sunak's premiership, well, they already have. Would he threaten them with a general election? Would they even care? So here's where it gets interesting. So, first of all, there is going to be a vote next week. Now, if it was just a normal vote, the bill would fail. I have little doubt about that. I think obviously the opposition can smell blood. They're going to get all their MPs there. There's obviously enough people on the right of the Conservative Party who will vote against it because they've basically said they need to vote against it. So what has Sunak done about this? So first of all, the whips are withdrawing permission slips. So essentially, like when a government really needs MPs to vote for a bill, they issue what's called a 3-line whip. And that essentially means get your arse down to Westminster, get yourself in the voting lobby. We need everyone, right? But there are some MPs who will have some good reason not to be there. So they'll go to the whip and say, look, I can't really be there. Can I have a slip? Basically a note from your mummy that says you don't have to do gym that day. So they've withdrawn. They're saying, no, we need everyone, right? We can't be messing about here. We need absolutely everyone there. And that in itself is not enough. Rishi Sunak, according to reports, has threatened to make this a confidence vote, confidence issue. Now, what that would mean, and I'm surprised he's got the bottle to do this because he hasn't done it before, it would mean that if any Tory MP votes against it, they will lose the whip. That's what he's potentially threatening. Now, I've seen a report. I don't know whether he's actually done that, but that's what he's threatening. Now, that seems to me a bit desperate because, first of all, this bill has got nothing to do with the manifesto promise. I mean, I've said in the past, he should have done that with the bill that he pulled last year on housing targets, because that was a manifesto commitment. He pulled it because he was facing a rebellion, but he would have had every right to say, actually, no, this was a manifesto commitment. You campaigned on this, so you will vote for it. And if you don't, if you will not vote for the Tory party manifesto, you're not going to be a Tory MP. He would have been entirely justified in doing that. He didn't. He's too weak. Earlier this year, when he says you do not impugn the work of the Privileges Committee, when several did, he should have removed the whip from them. He didn't. He's too weak. So now he reckons that to get a bill through the Commons, because it'll never clear the Lords, everyone knows it won't clear the Lords, to get a bill through the Commons, that has nothing to do, in fact, it actually contradicts the Tory party manifesto. I wish I'd brought it up earlier, actually. But there's a part in the Tory party manifesto that commits them to international law. It's in there. I should, in fact, let me find it at some point. I'll go through some comments in a moment. But in the Conservative Party manifesto 2019, there is a section, I'm going to find it. Let me find it really quickly. I may not find it that quickly. Right, here we go. We will continue to be an outward-looking country that is a champion of collective security, the rule of law, human rights, free trade, anti-corruption efforts, and a rules-based international system. That is in the Tory party manifesto from 2019. They all campaigned on that. They are now saying they want to disapply human rights laws. And it says there's a commitment in here on page 51 of the Tory party manifesto to human rights, as well as the rules-based international system. So Rishi Sunak is going to say he's going to remove the whip from any Tory MP who votes against a bill that itself contradicts the manifesto. The whole thing's crazy, utterly crazy. So yes, get your popcorn in for next week. I mean, there's letters going in now. There was some extra letters went in yesterday. We don't know how many. It may well be that there are some MPs waiting. So I'll tell you what could happen here. Let's go through some scenarios here. The first thing, well, actually, come back to this one. Actually, someone's making some comment points in the comments here. So the other thing that happened yesterday is the Rwandan government itself intervened, and they said, we will pull the deal if it doesn't obey international law, which was a frankly ridiculous thing. But there's people saying, there were people immediately saying on Twitter, well, what's probably happened here? James Cleverly visited Rwanda earlier this week, like Tuesday, I think it was. And people are basically saying what obviously happened is James Cleverly went to Rwanda, spoke with his opposite number in the Rwandan government, and said to them, look, can you do us a favour, right? We'll give you an extra 50, because I've given him an extra 15 million quid for something. We'll bung you an extra 15 million, right? In return, can you say that you will block the deal if it doesn't agree with international law? So then what happens is they make the statement in return for 15 million quid so that Rishi Sunak can tell his MPs, look, I know you wanted us to go further with this bill, but if we do, the Rwandan government will pull out of it and then we've got no deal. So what's the point? So Rishi Sunak thought he was being clever and covering himself, but it's not working because the right of the party, they don't care about the Rwanda plan. They're not interested in sending 100 refugees to Rwanda. They're not making all this fuss to send 100 refugees to Rwanda. Why would they care about that? No, they want human rights laws abolishing in this country for the 68 million of us who live here. This isn't about 100 people randomly picked off a small boat in the Channel. This is about 68 million people living in the UK. But in terms of scenarios, so let's go through a few. So let's say Rishi Sunak does make it a confidence issue. He's defeated anyway. And what then? He's forced to remove the whip from multiple MPs. Does he do it? Does he not? If he doesn't, he looks weak. If he does do it, he potentially triggers a situation where he ends up with having gone from a large majority to a minority government. Way more embarrassing than when Theresa May did it. Peter's saying there, will he call a general election rather than face a confidence vote? What I would say, maybe, I'll tell you what is the most likely route towards an earlier general election. So let's imagine the scenario here. Let us imagine that Rishi Sunak does win the vote next week. Let's say he manages to get it through the Commons, but he's pushing this, right? He's pushing it. So then it goes to the Lords. The Lords immediately reject it. There's no first, second, and third reading. They just immediately say, because what the Lords will probably try to do is think to themselves, their first instinct, the House of Lords does not generally block legislation. I cannot emphasize that. They're totally justified here. It breaks international law. It's not a manifesto commitment. In fact, it's the opposite of a manifesto commitment. So they're totally justified in blocking it, but they generally don't block things out of hand. They will first of all see if they can amend it to make it acceptable. Is there a way of amending it to make it acceptable? So they may propose amendments, which the government will then reject, at which point they will then vote it down. So I don't know how long all this takes. You may be talking a couple of months. Let us imagine a scenario where that happens, that the Lords have rejected it. Rishi Sunak at that point may well call a general election. Now, if he's minded to do that, I would do it quite quickly if I were him, and I'll tell you why. In a couple of weeks' time, we're going to get the results of the recall petition for Peter Bone in Wellingborough, Tory MP or former Tory MP. That is likely to trigger a by-election. It's a by-election in another one of these seats that the Conservatives really need to be winning if they're going to give themselves any chance in the election. But in reality, Labour will win. So Sunak doesn't want that. That's just extra hassle. If he calls a general election before that by-election takes place, the by-election will be cancelled. Right? Even if a writ is moved for the by-election, if he calls a general election before it, the by-election will just be cancelled and it'll just be part of the general election. So that was... So that, I think, is probably the more likely scenario here. That in January, Rishi Sunak delays on the writ for Peter Bone, or he sets it for like sometime in March. So let's say he sets the by-election for March, okay? Then this bill passes through the House of Lords, gets blocked, at which point Sunak will say, right, so what we're going to do now, we're going to have a general election. We're going to make this one of the main planks of that general election. Indeed, a lot of his MPs will want him to do that. And then we'll get the public mandate for it, which of course they won't, they will lose. That is the most likely. Tom saying, am I ready to be bored out of my mind with part 2 of Boris Johnson's COVID inquiry today? It wasn't at all boring. What's ridiculous is we're waiting for months, anticipating for months, the Boris Johnson Privileges Committee hearing. And then when it comes along, it's not even the main news of the day. You would have bet the farm on Boris Johnson at the COVID inquiry. I meant to say, sorry, Boris Johnson at the COVID inquiry being the big news story of the day. No, it's not at all. No one thinks it is. It's not just me. Let's have a look at the BBC News. What are they saying at the moment? Boris Johnson. It's not even. Is he even there? I'm looking at the front page. Oh no, there's a little bit about him down there, but it's all about Tory infighting. And I want you to consider something else as well. So think about this from the public's point of view, the not necessarily politically engaged public's point of view. So for years after the Brexit vote, it was quite obvious the government were focusing on Brexit and other things were falling by the wayside, right? And this idea, in 2019, Boris Johnson ran with the slogan, get Brexit done. Make Brexit work. That's a different party. Get Brexit done. And it worked not just to appeal to Brexit supporters, it worked for Remainers. Because what it was saying was, look, the government can't focus on doing its job because of Brexit. Let's get Brexit out of the way. Let's just leave. We'll just leave. I've got this ready-made deal. It's all done then. There's no more. It's done. We can then focus on dealing with healthcare and housing and all the rest of it, right? That was the promise. And that is what persuaded a load of people who didn't want to leave the EU to vote for it just to get it out of the way, just to make it stop. It's like being tortured. It's like, okay, I'll sign the confession, just make it stop. Obviously, that did not happen. But that's what the public wanted. They wanted a government that would just focus on governing. So you imagine that same public look at this now. And they go, okay, right, so the Tory parties are just melting down again. So instead of dealing with the cost of living crisis and healthcare and education and housing and even asylum, what are they doing? They're getting themselves ready for another leadership contest, because that's what this looks like. It looks like they're trying to get themselves ready to have a fourth leader in the space of like just over a year, when they've got a large majority. We're not talking about an unstable party. We're not talking about a party that's governing but doesn't really have the numbers. It's got the numbers. You know, and I saw someone say yesterday, how is it possible for this majority party to be less stable than the three-way coalition in Ireland, effectively, although the three parties, none of which have a majority in Ireland? And the reason is because the Conservative Party is a coalition. I said at the time, I don't think there's even a common thread throughout them. I don't think there's anything binding them together. Like, you can argue Labour and the Conservatives are always sort of a collection of factions, but there's usually something that runs through them. There's some common purpose. They just disagree on the extent of that purpose and how it should be done. But in the Conservative Party, you have now got very, very different. They're like different political parties. You know, and the thing is, unlike an actual coalition, there's none of the infrastructure. So if you imagine an actual coalition of two parties, like the Conservatives and the Lib Dems in 2010 to 2015, there was an infrastructure there because each of those parties had a leadership structure. But that doesn't happen here. That's not the case. Because they're trying to pretend they're all one party when they're not really. You don't have that leadership. You don't have that management structure in there. So, of course, it's really chaotic. What's with the BBC covering for Johnson? Their COVID inquiry, we need people to know the real truth. Well, it's like all of the media. I think there's two things to it. First of all, I mean, when you're looking at the BBC, they've obviously got... the Tories are in control of the BBC. It's really that simple. But I think the other thing is the mainstream media, including the BBC, did not... Like, there was some reporting, at least in the BBC, like Newsnight, for example, did a couple of very good documentaries on COVID at the time. But by and large, the BBC news team were not properly covering COVID. They weren't critically covering the government's performance in 2020 and 2021. Same with the rest of the mainstream media. I think there's a certain amount of covering for themselves, not just Boris Johnson. Because people... If people were informed about what's really coming out of the COVID inquiry, they may ask themselves, why didn't our media report on this at the time then? If all this was going on, how come journalists were not pressing the government properly? So I think they're covering for themselves. Bad Bones 777, £5 super chat, thank you. It says pensions, Hillsborough, NHS, Rwanda, blood, etc. just flailing. That's what's as scary as their cruelty, the utter incompetence and lack of strategy. Yes, although the silver lining to that is the public. It's so bad that the public see it. They're so dysfunctional. Like, the public see, take you back to the summer of 2021. The Conservatives were having their first leadership contest and of this parliament. And all of these senior Tories were all saying how badly the Tories had dealt with governing. But what the public wanted was, remember, we were getting ready for a massive hike in energy bills. And the public wanted the government to deal with that. Boris Johnson was saying, well, sorry, I can't deal with it because I'm not going to be the government. And people were saying, well, why don't you just get Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak together and just agree something? Because one of you is going to be the Prime Minister. Just agree something. No, we can't do that. So at the time when the public were desperate for the government to govern, the Tories were going, no, do you know what? We're having a little squabble. Can you just butt out, please? Well, the same thing's happening. The public want the government to deal with the cost of living crisis and housing and any number of other things. And the Tories are basically going, actually, we're having another little argument. Can you go away and come back later, please? So, all it's doing is just driving more and more people to think we cannot have this government. We cannot have this government for longer than we need to. But I do think we're on a trajectory where, I've thought for a long time, for various reasons, that May is the most likely. Not that I've thought May was so likely that I'd put it as over 50%, but more likely than other possible dates for an election. But it might be even earlier. Could be earlier. Could be April now. Because certainly it's... it says, why didn't Labour deal with the blood thing if it's been going on since the 70s? Well, it wasn't necessarily known in the 70s, but I don't know. It may well be that the last Labour government should have done something as well. I honestly can't tell you that. I don't know enough. It is possible. I don't remember when it came to light, because it's one thing. I don't know when it came to light. It may be that the last Labour government failed. I don't think the Labour government in the 70s, because they wouldn't have known it was going on, because it was going on in the 70s and the 80s, so no one twigged at least until the mid to late 80s, and it may have been much later. Will the BBC start falling towards Labour when it becomes obvious they're the new party of power? Only when they're actually in government, and that may have something to do with the fact that Labour will then replace the senior staff there. I would prefer it if they reformed the BBC so that they didn't have politically appointed, like wherever you've got political appointments. We can just look. The best example is the US Supreme Court. Political appointments of judges to the point where there's no point in putting any case before those judges, because you sort of know what the result is going to be. But all you have to do when it's a politically contentious issue, because okay, the Supreme Court may hear other things that don't have a particular political angle to them, but where there's a strong political angle to any case that the Supreme Court in the United States is hearing, all you have to do is say, okay, so what's the balance of Republican and Democrats? And I could, without knowing anything about American politics, not knowing much, I could tell you which way the vote's going to go. That is the consequence of politically appointing people who are supposed to be independent of government. So it's the same thing with the BBC. Stop making political appointments. Have them more like the judiciary. Can't we force a general election? It's our flipping government after all. Well, there isn't a mechanism. In reality, of course, if enough of the country wanted it, then yes. But you would have to have large numbers of the public barracking Tory MPs, because Labour MPs would be delighted. There's no point in hassling a Labour MP for one. They want one. But barracking Tory MPs to say we want a general election now. But they may well force themselves into it. I mean, I've said for now, by basically the last month, I don't see how Rishi Sunak can be stable enough to last until next autumn. I think anyone in the media now who, I'm not ruling out an autumn general election, but anyone in the media now who wants who wants to say that autumn is the most likely, because the media have been doing that for ages, and I'm just thinking you're having a laugh. But anyone who wants to say that today in the media is not a serious person. Sunak before the COVID inquiry will finish him. Oh, I doubt it. Well, the COVID inquiry with the least of Sunak's problems at the moment. Absolutely the least of Sunak's problems. Apart from anything else, the firestorm within his party will mean that it probably doesn't even get reported on. If the unthinkable happens and we get another leader, will they call an election right away? No. Can't see Braverman going to the polls if he's made leader. No. There's no point in going to the polls immediately. It depends who wins. So if you end up, all right, let's imagine a scenario where you end up with somewhat, because there's two major factions within the Tory party. There's the right of the Tory party and the One Nation Conservatives, or the left of the Conservative Party. And which is not the left wing, of course, but the left of their party. So let's say there's a candidate that's appealing to each one. So let's say you end up on the ballot with someone like Suella Braverman or someone like that, or Priti Patel, and you have someone who's more moderate. I don't actually know who that would be, quite frankly, because even what you might describe as more moderate possibilities are all still very right wing. And, most of the ones you could claim are moderate are ERG. Like you might think, oh, James Cleverly or Penny Mordaunt or Kemi Badnoch. Yeah, they're all ERG, all of them. So I'm not sure. But so let's say you had a proper raging nutter and someone who at least looked more plausible. The party members will vote for the raging nutter. Okay? They will vote for the raging nutter. So we will see what happens. I mean, we don't know. Michael's saying that with Patel or Braverman, in actual fact, there are a few possibilities that you may not be very aware of. They may go for someone very low key. The advantage of going for someone low key is if the public don't really know who they are, then they can't have a bad impression of them. Like someone like Priti Patel or Suella Braverman. Suella Braverman's actually really unpopular amongst the public. Her popularity is lower than Jeremy Corbyn's was amongst the public. Just because she's got her fans in the media in the Tory party, she's not popular with the public. If they went for her, curtains for them. I saw someone on Twitter go, oh, if they replace Sunak with Braverman, she would win the general election. She would absolutely not win the general election. Not at all. But anyway, when in 2025 would be the latest possible time to force the Conservative Party for general election? It's some date in January. So what happens is the government gets to say when the election's going to be. But it has to be by law within, they have to announce it within 5 years of the previous election. Now, if they don't do that, then it automatically happens. So let us imagine we get to whatever date it is in December. I can't remember what it was that we had the 2019 general election. So let's say we get to that date and whoever the Prime Minister is hasn't asked the King to dissolve Parliament and call a general election. The process will just then automatically happen. You know, some functionary will go to the... I mean, it will be avoided. This won't happen, by the way, because the palace will be fuming at being put in this position. But so what would realistically happen is, because the process would happen automatically anyway, and also consider this strategically, if the government do not trigger the general election and it happens automatically, Labour will say they're so scared of a general election they couldn't even call one on the last possible day. So realistically, they will call it on the last possible day because it doesn't save them any more time, and they don't want Labour saying they were so scared of the election they wouldn't even call it. Well, there's two people, one saying 25th of January, one saying 28th, but it's sometime in January. It is some date in January. If Kemi becomes leader, I'm off to Ireland. Well, is there anyone who you would even look at them and go, well, they're not that bad? I actually can't think of anyone. You know, the least offensive you might think is Penny Mordaunt, but consider this. Penny Mordaunt, I mean, the party's still the party. It doesn't matter who becomes the leader. The party is still what it is. And none of these leaders are strong leaders. Penny Mordaunt's weak. James Cleverly's weak. Suella Braverman's weak. Priti Patel is weak. Kemi Badenoch is weak. They are all weak. They will, you know, they will all try to appease in fact, some of them are the lunatics. Suella Braverman and Priti Patel are they can count themselves amongst the lunatics. But anyone that's not full-on swivel-eyed loon will still try to appease them. Just like Sunak did, which failed. Just like Johnson did, which failed. But there it is. Someone mentioned Gove. Gove's not going to stand for the leadership. He's got no chance anyway. The party's not interested in pragmatic. They're not going to go for Gove. And he's not interested. I mean, the suggestion is that he's not even going to stand at the election. There's suggestions, nothing's been announced, but there are suggestions that neither Jeremy Hunt nor Michael Gove will even stand in the election. Cameron has a chance. Cameron's not going to have a chance. He's not in the Commons. It's in the House of Lords. In theory, you can have a Prime Minister who's in the House of Lords constitutionally, but it's not going to happen these days. It's bizarre enough that you allow someone to hold you know, a ministry of state, but not the Prime Minister. Wish for Ed Davey to become leader of the opposition, then we don't need to worry about the party squabbling in the third largest party. Yeah, it's not realistic, unfortunately. You know, there's just a floor of people who will always just vote Tory. One angry pagan saying, I can wield a sword, not going to run for Tory leader though. Well, I can do rather better than Penny Mordaunt, certainly. In fact, I've got a better... It wasn't even her sword. She had to borrow it. She hadn't even got a sword. Peter Bone for Prime Minister. No, he's not even going to be an MP in 2 weeks' time. In 2 weeks, yesterday or Tuesday, the recall petition finishes, and then it'll take a couple of days for the counting. And then that'll be it. It won't even be an MP. Will not even be an MP. But there is no one feasible. Like, the Conservative Party are going to be poorly led for a little while now. They are going to be poorly led for a little while. That doesn't necessarily mean that Labour can breathe easy and give themselves a good 10 years to get their ducks in a row before they face a tough election. They must, right from day one, think they're going to have a real tough contest in the following election. But they are going to be poorly led. Oh, Sunak holding a press conference at 11 a.m. Really? Is he? That's interesting. I did not know. Let's have a look here. Let's have a look. Oh, yeah. Shit. So that, do you know what? They're messing with my timing again. So I have a video on my channel that comes out at 12. I've already written it. I haven't recorded it yet. And I'm now thinking, but I can't just wait till 11 because the press conference like starts at 11. He'll probably, do I have to wait till like, oh my God. Right. Hopefully it's a quick one. Oh, it won't be a quick one, will it? I'm just going to have to record it and hope he doesn't say anything that completely changes everything. But there we go. We have run out of time. We've gone over time again. Absolutely again. But we will just have to see how this pans out. If he's got a press conference at 11, it'll be a message for his MPs, not the public. I would think that. It'll actually, do you know what? It'll probably just be to explain what the Rwanda bill is. But it will be a message to his MPs. It will be a way of him saying something to the public so that inevitably the likes of YouGov then carry out some polling of public opinion so he can say to his MPs, look, the public approve of this. That's what it'll be about. That is what it'll be about. Isn't 11 a.m. the lobby briefing? Sometimes they do, well, they do them in the morning often, yes, but not this one. This is actually, it is saying a press conference. But anyway, we'll leave it there anyway. We'll see what happens later on today and then next week and all the rest of it. Have a good day, everyone. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, I will see you later.